Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Well. I'm Chris Steyerwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Inkstained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, happy summer. Are you feeling it? Are you ready for it?
I'm totally feeling it.
Are you a summer person?
Yeah.
More than...
Who's not a summer person?
I'm not a summer. Have you ever
You're
talked
a winter
to any...
person?
You ever talked to any fat dudes? You ought to talk to some fat dudes, because we're not out here signing up for...
I'll go consult my token fat friends, and
You need more fat representation in your
some
circles.
of my best friends are fat. I'll go talk to them.
Because we are not into it. And obviously autumn is the best season, followed by spring, followed by winter, summer being the worst of the seasons.
I'm
What's your ranking?
happy.
How do you rank them?
Winter's last, but I would say spring, fall, summer, winter.
Spring, fall, summer, winter. Okay. All right. So that's not radical. You're not like summer first.
No, but I like the summer.
Summer better
great.
than others, if you know what I mean.
That's great.
All right. Okay. Fine. I like your sunny positivity.
And you know what I don't like was we were coming to record this podcast in a cavernous basement that's over air conditioned, and
No.
I would like to do an outdoor recording.
Just so they can see me sweat.
Yeah.
Just so that I can glisten like a Easter ham for the delight of our YouTube audience. That's fine. I'll do it. I'll do it
all
for
right,
you.
Well, let's get to our front page. These are the stories that we thought were most important this week. Chris, you very much wanted to talk about the New York Times, and it's not just the Times, but the continuing coverage of Justice Alito. And the Times did a piece about secret recordings taken of him at a Christian conference.
I don't believe it was. I believe that it was a woman paid the $500
Right.
to attend there's a Supreme Court Historical Society.
Oh, okay.
So this is a fun...
And she herself was posing as a Catholic.
She lied and said
Okay.
that she was a traditional conservative. And the Supreme Court hosts this gathering, or the justices of the Supreme Court attend the gathering, which raises money. And there's a White House Historical Society, too, that raises money to, I assume, spruce up things around the Supreme Court and buy artifacts and preserve stuff. And this woman posed as a conservative Christian and buttonholed Justice Alito, Chief Justice John Roberts, and Samuel Alito's wife also. I don't know whether Mrs. Alito was at whether that was the same event or not. But when this story broke, and I got a New York Times alert, Alito says, endorses notion of godliness. And I thought, whoa, okay, well, maybe there's something here. Then you read it, and you know what's there? Nothing. There's nothing there. Samuel Alito says to a woman who sounds like a crazy person talking to him at this event, when she says godliness, he says, yeah, cool. And there was a conservative, a right-wing provocateur named James O'Keefe. And they had a thing.
Wait, can we just say what he said?
Oh, yeah, say what he said.
He says, there can be a way of working, a way of living together peacefully, i.e. the two sides of the political divide. But it's difficult, because there are differences on fundamental things that really can't be compromised. And then she, in her posing, status, says, I think that the solution really is like winning the moral argument, she told him, according to the edited recordings. Like, people in this country who believe in God have got to keep fighting for that to return our country to a place of godliness. And he said, I agree with you. I agree with you.
I agree with you. The way that you'd say to move on from an awkward conversation at a cocktail reception that you're forced to attend for work.
Also, even if he really did agree with that, it wouldn't be scandalous. Big deal.
Journalism part of this. So I understand all of the focus on the flags of the many flags of the Alitos and all of that. I got it. And there's this incredible focus on the Supreme Court right now because the progressive project currently is to change the Supreme Court. And this is all follow on to Roe v. Wade, the fall of Roe v. Wade. Intensified it, and there's intense focus. And by the way, will help some Democrats in Senate races, right? It will help some Democrats. There are positive political consequences for Democrats in this. But this story not only was a nothing burger, it was an unethically sourced nothing burger. And for the Times to accept, I mentioned James O'Keefe. It's the same idea. It's laundering. Somebody obtains something through journalistically inappropriate, non-journalistic means, right? I have a secret recording that I entrapped a person into saying something, and I want to share it. Now, the New York Times wouldn't do that, but they will take, and they'll say, well, it's already out there. It's already out there. And I've been in newsroom discussions around these kinds of things, and it's already out there is pretty powerful. Well, it's already out anyway. We might as well do it. And I get it. But the treatment of this was heinous. And I point you to a piece at Poynter, a column from, and I want to give credit to this person, Tom Jones at the Poynter Institute on the ethics of this. Not only did she not identify herself as a journalist when talking to Supreme Court justices, she lied about her views. Then she conducted what essentially were interviews without the subjects knowing they were being interviewed for a story. Poynter Senior Vice President Kelly McBride, chair of the Craig Network Center for Ethics and Leadership, told me, is there ever a time that it's okay for a journalist to deceive somebody? I would say never. But I have yet, in 20 years of offering ethics advice, seen an instance that I would say is justified. McBride also told me, this would not be common practice at a legitimate news organization, saying any other journalist would be fired for doing something like that. Like any ill-gotten piece of information, it puts us in a position as journalists where we have to be very transparent about the audience about what we know and what we don't know. The insanity surrounding the coverage of the Supreme Court, the degree to which this has become obsessive, has led these news organizations into very dubious spaces. And there's just no excuse, no matter, even if Samuel Alito was a Christian nationalist, if he was everything that his critics believe that he was, and I don't know what Samuel Alito thinks about Christian nationalism. I really don't. But even if he was, it would not allow for this kind of shoddy information laundering, especially when in the end, you know what we learned about Samuel Alito from this whole thing that the New York Times besmirched itself over? Nothing. We learned absolutely nothing about Samuel Alito when no light was shed on this. And what was salacious about it was that it was secret.
I was amused by a line in the story where the Times writes, Ms. Windsor, and this is the woman posing as a Catholic activist, describes herself as a documentary filmmaker and advocacy journalist. She has a reputation for approaching conservatives, including former Vice President Mike Pence, Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, and Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia. She said in an interview on Monday that she felt she had no other way to report on the candid thoughts of the justices. And I'm sure that when they're meeting a complete stranger at
Totally
an event,
candid.
they're getting really the raw and unvarnished
They
thoughts
just
of
get
these
real.
people. Yeah.
They just get real.
I mean, give me a break.
At a compulsory work mixer, they just let their guard down and they just become themselves.
And The other thing that
By the way, how good was John Roberts in the response?
he was
the masterful John Roberts, who assessed the situation and is like, okay, I'm dealing with a wackadoodle, and then never gave her anything. He jawboned it and ground it down to nothing. It was very impressive. I will be imitating John Roberts in cocktail party banter henceforth.
Well, the other thing I think is interesting, and like to pull back a little bit, is that a year ago at this time, we lived through, there were 15 stories about Clarence Thomas.
Right.
And they appeared in all different outlets.
Yep.
But he was the focus. We are now in the season of Alito.
The season of
and
Alito.
It's
interesting. There's your show title right there.
Because the stories are appearing in different outlets, but there is this coordinated, not explicitly, but they have moved on from Thomas to Alito. And
well, there was Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh, yes, exactly.
We had the season of Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
We had the season of Thomas. Now we've got the season of Alito. Neil Gorsuch has had a couple of brushes, but Amy Coney Barrett is just sitting around like, good luck, suckers. I'm sitting this one out. I'm sitting this one out. You guys go for it.
Her time in the barrel will come, I have no doubt.
And by the way, as we were about to start recording, a decision was handed down, or a ruling was handed down from the Supreme Court. The Christian nationalists on the Supreme Court unanimously agreed that they did not have jurisdiction, or that the litigants,
plaintiffs did not have standing.
The litigants did not have standing, and the Supreme Court will not ban, will not
access to mifepristone.
Yeah, will not dive in on chemical abortion, so, as a Christian nationalist, Samuel Alito is doing a terrible job. He's just doing a terrible job as a Christian nationalist.
Okay. Up next.
Oh baby,
we have our Washington Post section. A lot to talk about there.
Will Lewis, welcome to Washington.
A few things. The people at the Post are clearly out to eat Will Lewis alive. And as part of that, NPR and the New York Times reported on the fact that he had attempted to quash reporting about his involvement in a phone hacking scandal in the UK in his previous job.
So for context, a week ago, we were talking about, okay, Lewis has fired his shots across the bow of the Post newsroom. And I believe last week, tell me what's true. I believe last week we were at the point in the story where the Post they had sacked or pushed out Sally Busby, the executive editor.
Yes.
And the Post had done its story on how the phone hacking allegation. So it came from another outlet, but then the Post did its own reporting on the controversy that some say led to Busby's ouster, which was her confronting Lewis about the reporting on his role in the Murdoch world phone hacking scandals of Britain. Is that right?
Nobody is saying that that's actually what led to it, but they say that they had a tense conversation where she came to him and said, hey, we're going to report on this. And he said, I don't really think it's newsworthy. And then subsequently he said, essentially, here's my plan for the newsroom. We're going to demote you to managing a third, in so many words. And she said, she made the decision, I don't want to stick around to be demoted, which is understandable. But they're not mutually exclusive, these two things, where she didn't resign over. Right.
So, and then following that, David Folkenflik at NPR said, well, it's funny you mentioned that, because when I was trying to do a story about this with Will Lewis, here's what the Times says. Folkenflik, a veteran media reporter for NPR, wrote that a spokesperson for Mr. Lewis confirmed the offer in December that Lewis would give him an exclusive interview if the reporter agreed to not write about allegations against Mr. Lewis in a phone hacking scandal in Britain. And here's what Folkenflik wrote. In several conversations, Lewis repeatedly and heatedly offered to give me an exclusive interview about the Post's future as long as I dropped the story about the allegations. Now, people trade with reporters all the time. And Folkenflik was doing nothing wrong. And Lewis wasn't really doing anything wrong and saying, look, I'll make you a deal. Leave me out of this thing and I'll give you an exclusive. It's horse trading that happens, right? And that's okay because
I will say it's sort of clumsy horse trading if you're going to come and be the publisher of a major American newspaper. Like, not great judgment, but also it's not the most scandalous thing in the entire world.
It's not the most scandalous thing, but I will say, if you're going to do it, you better seal the deal, right? You don't make this blandishment. You don't make this offer to Folkenflik, who's a good reporter, and say, I'll tell you what, you leave me out of this story and there'll be something good in it for you. And you don't give him something good about it. You don't do it. And then the thing that you wanted to talk to him about in the first place blows up. And Folkenflik's like, okay, bro, here you go. You got into horse trading, but you didn't give me the horse. And failing to give him the horse was a mistake.
Well, so moving on to the further coverage of this, the Post had a piece about all of this drama.
They sure did.
The headline is "The Post at a Crossroads: Existential Questions in a Dire Season for News."
So,
and this is related
even-handed.
to
They're just loose about it.
Some other Post coverage. But when I read this, I thought this coverage and so many lines in this are why the Post sucks, and why, partly why it's bleeding money and bleeding readers. There were so many just absurd lines in this story. So and I just wanted to go through them. So they're covering their own drama, and they write of Jeff Bezos. What Bezos wants from and for the Post has remained the compelling question through a week of internal turmoil, during which his handpicked new publisher and CEO, William Lewis, abruptly replaced the newspaper's first female executive editor and announced a reorganization in the newsroom, blah, blah. But they're thinking that the interesting, noteworthy part of this is that he replaced a woman with a man, and their focus on gender and identity above everything else. And it reflected the complaints that came from the newsroom. So Lewis's responses in that meeting, especially to staffers asking challenging questions about his business plan, rankled many in the room with the suggestion that the Post has been resistant to change.
How could anyone suggest that the Post is resistant to change?
And so then they write, while Lewis has carried on with small staff meetings this week, informing journalists on Monday that the new newsroom structure will launch in fiscal 2024's third quarter, which starts in 3 weeks, the transition has unnerved current and former Post staffers who regard it as a crucial institution covering a historic presidential election at a moment of political upheaval. And the suggestion is obviously that his changes are going to destroy rather than save that, because, by the way, the alternative to Will Lewis is these people losing their jobs, more layoffs, the thing going under. So anyway, and then the quote is, people can say it's too far to the left or right, and that's irrelevant. Oh, yes, this is completely irrelevant. It's the search for truth that's relevant and important. That's what the Post stands for, said David Moranis, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who spent decades at the Post and remains an associate editor. It doesn't always reach that level, but that's the mission. Okay, sure, dude. Like, who cares if they're getting 1% of the way there or 80% of the way there? It's just that that's the goal.
It's hard to write about yourself. And the Post is in a difficult position in which everybody, the vultures at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, are circling over them and feasting on this drama in their newsroom. And so it's hard to write about yourself because as you're writing about yourself, you want to keep your standing with your colleagues in the newsroom. And you are also cognizant of what your bosses think about what you're doing and all of this stuff. But what I have mostly observed is that people at the Post are trying to leverage this into pressure on Jeff Bezos. I assume to fire Lewis or undo Lewis, but also to try to shame Jeff Bezos into doing something different. I think Will Lewis has mishandled the situation in many ways. In many ways, he has mishandled the situation.
And yet, reading all the coverage and seeing the reaction, I'm Team Will Lewis.
Well, one thing I'm definitely Team Will Lewis about, and this is from Axios, is this, and I'm not going to read any of the dumb prompts. Yes, thanks, Colin, for bolding the dumb prompts. Sir William and Company are floating an idea called Local Plus, a new offering for readers who want to pay extra for premium local content, sources tell the writer at Axios. The nascent idea includes building a subscription model with premium newsletters and exclusive experiences for locals. This would be a 180. The Jeff Bezos era introduced the idea of the everything newspaper. Local took a backseat in the pursuit of to go toe-to-toe with the New York Times. Lord, hear my prayer. If the Washington Post would return to being a Washington newspaper covering the District of Columbia, suburban Maryland, suburban Virginia, if they would cover local sports, not just the professional teams, but also high school sports, local sports, it would be great. It would be really, really helpful for the Washington area. By the way, when I say Washington, I generally mean the metro area.
Okay.
And when I say D.C., I mean the District of Columbia. How do you are those terms interchangeable or do they have different meanings to you?
Interchangeable.
Interchangeable,
Yeah.
all right. I think of Washington as the region. But anyway, that's a great idea because the Post local coverage there's been actual human harm as a result of the Washington Post trying to compete with the New York Times instead of trying to be should be a great local newspaper. And I understand why for Jeff Bezos, what do you want to buy there's only 500,000 people or so that live in the city in DC. And as a metro area, it's a mid-sized city. And it wouldn't be very appealing to Jeff Bezos to have a newspaper that was focused on those things, but it would sure be good for this area if it did. So Local Plus, bring it on.
Chris, did you want to talk briefly about the New York Times piece that the headline is, "The British aren't coming, they're here." As a historic presidential election looms, several of America's largest and most powerful newsrooms are now being led by English journalists. Why? And the focus this is by Michael Grinbaum in the Times, and it's a good idea for a piece.
Yes, it's
Mark Thompson at CNN.
3 makes a trend.
Emma Tucker at the Wall Street Journal and Will Lewis at the Washington Post. And so Michael Grinbaum gets an interview with Anna Wintour, and she tells him, "Americans think we're less expensive and more cutthroat." Miss Wintour, the editor of Vogue since 1988 and chief content officer of Condé Nast, wrote in an email, "It's also true that news is so much a part of British culture that it's in our blood, a bit like football or humor or Shakespeare. British people tend to be good with fewer resources," she said. "The industry's in crisis and Brits are unflappable in crises." So I think that's Joanne.
Andy talked to Tina Brown.
And Joanna Coles, who just took over the Daily Beast. Plus, Ms. Coles added, "The current malaise in American politics and the fear that the country's global power is waning feel old hat for the British. The end of the empire is a very familiar scenario for us, so we're not daunted by it," she said. British editors also have a stolid track record. So it's an interesting and
It's an
fun
interesting piece,
piece.
and there's a very long tradition. Our friend Andrew Sullivan, we could go down a long list of Brits and plus they have the accent, so we think they're smarter.
All right, up next, we should talk about the coverage of Israel's hostage rescue last weekend and the outsized focus on the civilian casualties that took place when Israel had to go in. It was a daylight raid where they rescued 4 hostages that were being held in civilian
Can we start
homes.
with the audio you found? I think that'd be a great place to start.
So an FDD fellow, Jonathan Conricus, who's a Foundation for Defense of Democracy, a think tank based here in D.C., but Conricus, who's with them now, is a former spokesman for the IDF. So he was out talking about this, and he did an interview with the BBC in which he was immediately pressed on whether saving 4 Israeli civilians who had been taken hostage by Hamas and then held in civilian homes, how they could justify the killing of civilians, over 100 civilians, and extracting them. And so here's what he was asked.
It is appearing to be a high civilian death toll. Would there have been a warning to those civilians for them to get out on time?
For sure, of course, we cannot anticipate Israel to be warning ahead of a raid to extract or to save hostages, because then what the terrorists would do is to kill the hostages, and that would defeat the purpose. So, of course, we cannot expect that.
Well, I would say that was the general tenor of a lot of the coverage was, how dare you kill civilians when rescuing your hostages? And he noted that when they went in for this carefully orchestrated raid, that when they were extracting the hostages, Hamas opened fire on all of them. So there was a big gunfight that ensued, incredibly dangerous raid. But we're going to go back to the Washington Post because Robert Satloff, who is at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, he noted the Washington Post's coverage of this. And again, like their coverage of their own drama, this coverage says a lot about the problems plaguing the Post. So the headline is, more than 200 Palestinians killed in Israeli hostage raid in Gaza. And the subheadline is, the brazen daytime raid freed 4 Israeli hostages, but unleashed relentless bombardment of the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. The reporters write, Israel's military launched one of the bloodiest raids of the war Saturday, killing more than 200 Palestinians in a brazen operation to rescue 4 hostages from the central Gaza Strip. Israeli forces recovered the hostages alive from 2 buildings in Nuseirat, an impoverished refugee camp, but the fiery assault in the middle of the day left unimaginable devastation in its wake. And I would note that, as Satloff does, that throughout this entire story, and he notes that there are 11 reporters on the story, they do not mention that the hostages were being held by civilians in civilian homes in multi-story apartment buildings, which of course is part of Hamas's deliberate strategy to endanger civilians. And what occurred to me when I was reading this and talking to people about it was that if you read this story as a consumer of news wanting to know what happens, you actually would not be informed about what happened, why it happened. This was not informative in terms of, if you go back to Moranis' quote about, we're trying to seek truth and tell people the truth. Well, this was a complete fail. And it contrasted with an obvious piece, but one that I haven't seen written since the start of the war. The Wall Street Journal had a piece that was related to the raid, but they actually got their hands on text messages from Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar. And the headline of their piece is, Gaza chief's brutal calculation, civilian bloodshed will help Hamas. And of course we know this, but but the text messages
He
are,
says,
of course, helpful.
He says, we have the Israelis right where we want them, Sinwar said in a recent message to Hamas officials seeking to broker an agreement with Qatari and Egyptian officials. And, look, I don't want to Tucker Carlson this, but I certainly see the point of view of Israelis who say, if we are going to be called war criminals, whatever we do, why don't we just do whatever we want, right? There is a the giving up. I don't believe that they have done this, but the arguments for prosecuting your war in any way you want, if you're going to be called a butcher and a war criminal for doing something quite impressive, right? They did something quite impressive, which is they got their people back. And their people, and I read also that they were being used basically as domestic slaves, held in captivity. We know that people have been raped. We know that children have been abused. We know that all of this stuff has happened. And if there's one thing that the Israelis are famous for, they get their man, right? The whole premise of Israel, and we can go to Adolf Eichmann, we can get but the whole premise is we're small but we're mighty, and we get our people. And the treatment of this raid as something shameful or something outrageous, if I was an Israeli, I would say, oh, okay, well, if even this is forbidden, if even this is off limits, then you all can go to hell, and we're going to do whatever we want. It would be, I can see the temptation.
Back to the journal that has Sinwar's messages, they write, in dozens of messages reviewed by the Wall Street Journal that Sinwar has transmitted to ceasefire negotiators, Hamas compatriots outside Gaza, and others, he's shown a cold disregard for human life and made clear he believes Israel has more to lose from the war than Hamas. The messages were shared by multiple people with differing views of Sinwar. In one message to Hamas leaders in Doha, Sinwar cited civilian losses in national liberation conflicts in places such as Algeria, where hundreds of thousands of people died fighting for independence from France, saying these are necessary sacrifices. And that is his view of all of these civilian casualties that take place.
And he's got a good read on what a lot of people in the media, how a lot of people in the media do cover this and do understand it.
He says, as long as fighters are still standing and we have not lost the war, such contact should be immediately terminated. He's talking about negotiations. We have the capabilities to continue fighting for months. Okay. But great report in the journal.
Quite so.
All right. We turn our attention to 2024. You want to kick it off, Chris?
Here's USA Today report. Trouble with his teleprompter forced former President Donald Trump to go off script Sunday, leading to a rant about his active dislike for sharks during a campaign event in the sweltering heat that sent 6 people to the hospital in Nevada. In a wide-ranging speech to 6,900 Silver State voters 2 days before the primary election, the presumptive Republican nominee announced a new plan to end taxes on tips, which, by the way, very good politics. In Nevada, very good politics. If you're trying to undermine Democratic support among service workers, throwing out the idea that Congress is going to repeal the tax on or exempt tips, that's very good politics. While his teleprompter was down, Trump, who frequently rails against renewable energy, described meeting with a boat manufacturer in South Carolina. His concern that electric boats' weight could make them prone to sinking led him to several tangents, including one about sharks. Trump says, it must be because of MIT, my relationship with MIT. Very smart. I say, what would happen if the boat sank from its weight and you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery and the battery is now underwater and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there, Trump said. By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Did you notice that? And
I didn't.
Where
have I been?
We are definitely having
Where have I been?
We're definitely having flashbacks to the summer of 2001 when the shark attack narrative was strong. We're having another taste of an availability cascade and confirmation bias at work. But I flagged this piece because it points to the challenges of covering Donald Trump. So Donald Trump goes on a rant about sharks that is gibberish, right? He goes on this blatherskite about MIT and his genius and how electric boats work, and just this is, it's a goofball. And how we cover Trump and Biden represents a serious challenge, because on the one hand, is it new that Donald Trump is a crazy person, talks like a crazy person frequently? No, that's part of Donald Trump. And many people like the fact that he talks like a crazy person. I'm sure the people, including the people that went to the hospital. I did see one headline that was about Trump says he doesn't care about people, he just wants their votes. Because he doesn't care if they go to the hospital, he doesn't want them to die because he wants their votes. Well, he was obviously joking about that. He was obviously saying that was a gag. But how to cover Donald Trump, we come back to this again and again, and it's the same problem with covering Joe Biden. You could write a story every day about how these two people make no sense, and they don't make sense when they talk. With Biden, he trails off into mumbling incoherence, and Trump is loud incoherence. You can't. How do you cover it? And I really don't know the answer. I don't really know what the answer is, because if you're there in Nevada covering a campaign rally, and if Barack Obama had started talking about how smart he was and the batteries of electric boats and his concerns about sharks, and musing on the question of whether he would be electrocuted or eaten by a shark. Trump, by the way, prefers electrocution. If Trump, just so that you know, if you're wondering which Donald Trump would prefer, electrocution or shark death, he's team electrocution. But if you're a reporter covering this, do you cover that? Do you cover something else? It's exhausting. And the same could be said of Biden and his elderly person ramblings. Like, what are you supposed to do? How do you cover that as a speech?
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. The Washington Post, though, is rising to the challenge. Why scientists fear a second Trump term and what they're doing about it. And Colin rightly put this in the facile file this week. He manned up and he put it in the facile file. I put it up here because it lives in campaign coverage, because I think it speaks to the all hands on deck approach that is going on about trying to convince people of the urgency of preventing Donald Trump from winning re-election. And what made it facile, though, the headline, why scientists fear a second Trump term. All scientists? Does every scientist in the country, are they all united in fear about a Donald Trump presidency? And then they give it away right in the lead.
It's amazing.
Right in the lead.
And the fact that this comes, the lead is about an EPA union.
When the union, this is how they begin.
When
scientists. The union, representing nearly half of Environmental Protection Agency employees, approved a new contract with the federal government last month. It included an unusual provision that had nothing to do with pay, benefits, or workplace flexibility, protections from political meddling into their work. I wonder how the union representing half of the EPA is voting.
To have this come in the shadow of the errors, lies, etc., of institutionalized science, quote unquote, in this country, where those people were employed by the government, and to still act like these people represent science, like, come on, and make no caveat that, like, this has become politicized.
Well, this is scientism, right? This is the religion of science. And if you say scientists are worried, and look, it's not without concern, right? It's not without concern that Donald Trump administration will ride roughshod. If I was a climate change scientist at the EPA, I would definitely want Joe Biden to win the election, for sure. And I would be concerned. But the framing here is that scientists, that the world of science fears Donald Trump. I would say it's probably that progressive or liberal or democratic members of that community are concerned, and boo.
Amazing. Chris, Hunter Biden also convicted this week on gun charges, and the Washington Post.
Matt Visor.
Has a piece.
A
Hunter
great piece.
Biden's trial pulled back curtain on family's dark moments. The Bidens have repeatedly sought to come together. Tragic events and internal divisions have pulled them apart.
This was a post-trial wrap-up piece, and it was very well written. And here's a snippet. Ashley Biden, Hunter's sister, wept quietly as prosecutors played an audiobook of his memoir, specifically a portion recounting how he would cook cocaine and neglect his family. Kathleen Buell, his ex-wife, spoke about the strain Hunter's addiction put on their daughters and their marriage. Joe Biden was not there for the testimony. Quote, "He moved out after I found the crack pipe," Buell said, "but I didn't consider us separated until I found out about the infidelity." Some of that infidelity occurred with her former sister-in-law, Hallie Biden, who said that she and Hunter both began using drugs in the aftermath of Beau's death. "It was a terrible experience that I went through," she told jurors, speaking softly and haltingly. "I'm embarrassed and ashamed. I regret that part of my life." And Visor captures a moment where she's looking not at the Bidens for approval and affirmation, but at her new husband. And can you imagine? You've remarried. You've tried to move on with your life. You were part of this sordid episode. And your new husband has to sit in the courtroom and listen to you talk about doing drugs and having sex with your dead husband's brother and having to do all of that. It was well written and gripping. And I point to it mostly because I think the job that the press did overall on the Hunter Biden trial was good. I think that overall it was well covered. It was thoroughly covered. And there was some, and I saw it pop up here and there, but I don't think it was a mainstream thing that said, "Oh, Hunter Biden's being railroaded," or "this is unfair," or Hunter Biden shouldn't have pleaded guilty, or all of that stuff. But I think this one stuck, and I think that's I think this Visor piece it speaks to a generally creditable coverage.
It's interesting because it's a good and interesting piece. I will say that if you've gotten into Hunter Biden's text messages, which have been pretty widely available, obviously, it is clear that there's a lot of bitterness and division in that family. And it was interesting to see Jill Biden show up at the trial because, of course, in the text messages, he has choice words for her. It's clear that there is a lot of animosity between those two. So, I mean, good for the mainstream media.
Jill Biden continues. I believe that she will be Joe Biden's most important asset in this election when we get to the end, because she's well liked and she's the one. I have offered a lot of criticism for her for not pushing her husband to drop out of the race, which I think would have been the correct thing to do in 2022 or early 2023. But I was struck by Joe Biden's presence at that trial. Visor talks about the shuttling back and forth, going to events in Europe and then flying home to go to the trial. I think she'll play a significant role as a character witness for Joe Biden and saying, "No, he's fine. He's okay.
He's a maniac in bed, let me tell you."
Pass.
Let me tell you.
Unsubscribe from future updates from this thread.
Did you want to talk about this New York Times piece about Biden's tall tales?
Yes. The New York Times did a catch-all on, it's a fact check, and you know what I think about fact checking. But about they put together a compendium of Biden's most recent lies and whoppers, and like, "I used to drive an 18-wheeler," he said at a campaign event in Florida. Mr. Biden often repeats this claim when attending events with union members. White House cited Biden's job driving a school bus during law school in the 1970s. He also took a 500-mile trip as a senator on a cargo truck. Okay, so no. What was said? As a matter of fact, the first organization I ever joined was the NAACP. Didn't get to vote until you were 21 in those days, but I got involved in the civil rights when I was 15. And for decades, Mr. Biden has occasionally suggested that he played a greater role in the civil rights movement than he actually did. While there is corroboration of Mr. Biden's participation in a few desegregation events, he also said he would not consider himself an activist in the movement. There is no evidence that he was ever arrested. Wait, he said he was arrested?
Yeah. He said he was arrested at a pro-apartheid or anti-apartheid protest.
Oh, yeah. She said, remember when they were desegregating Linfield, the neighborhood? It was 70 homes built, suburbia. I love the Joe Biden word salad. And I told you there was a black family moving in and people were down there protesting. I told you not to go down there and you went down. Remember that? And you got arrested standing on the porch with a black family. What? So, and he did an interview with Howard Stern. How have I not listened to the Joe Biden Howard Stern interview talking about wiping? So I guess I would say good on the New York Times for collecting these and repeating them and debunking them.
All right, Chris, in news about the news business, the CNN is now taking AP Wire stories. Yes. The New York Post writes the following. CNN staffers fear layoffs as network inks deal with the Associated Press. CNN inked a deal with the Associated Press to use copy on its website, the first time it has done so since cutting ties with the wire service 14 years ago. But the deal is sparking concerns among staffers of further job cuts as the struggling cable news network, according to Puck, which first reported the news. The fears come as CNN boss Mark Thompson, the Brit, is sharpening his strategic vision to turn the network around. CNN canceled its contract with the AP in 2010 in order to focus more on original reporting and expanding its own global news coverage. So, seems like an ominous sign.
Well,
but they are going to, I mean, they instead of taking the AP Wire, they hired up a ton of people on their digital side to write the stories themselves.
And News Corp tried a similar thing to similarly poor result in the end. The Associated Press is flawed but necessary, and it's a good value. Basically, in the end, the Associated Press, as much as I complain about a lot of the flummery that they pump out, is a good value, and you get a lot more than just the wire copy. You get the pictures and the election results and the things that you need to keep it going. So I suppose this was inevitable.
Chris, that brings us to our facile file, where we have a Washington Post story. The headline, How One Delightful Channel Soothed My Election Year Angst. The perfect opposite of our rage-frothing politics, watching a cheetah who's best friends with a dog. And this is about it's like about the DC Zoo's YouTube channel. San Diego Zoo Kids channel.
Zoo, yeah.
Okay, where you learn that a tortoise enjoys getting a nice back scrub from a keeper. And there's a cheetah who's best friends with a dog. I did not even read this.
Well, it's got Kenny Loggins in it.
Okay.
And he donated his the custom theme song for the San Diego Zoo Kids channel. And it's called The Great Adventure. So Kenny Loggins is a fan. Have you ever been to the San Diego Zoo? Of
course.
It's fabulous.
It's great.
It's truly fabulous. Pandas, as everyone knows by now, are overrated. Pandas are, I'm the least panda enthusiast. And you know my thing about wanting to eat pandas, right?
No.
So I'm a pro panda abundance person. And I believe that the pandas were on track for extinction. They can't breed effectively. They only eat one thing. Pandas, they got a lot of problems. They got a lot of problems. But I think that we should ranch pandas and that we should eat them I think we should be open to eat them because I think that they're lazy and they're herbivores and consequently could have delicious meat. And I don't want to eat pandas now because there's too few pandas. But I think if we could clone pandas or we could really get them going, we could have vast panda ranches across big swaths.
Why do you think they would taste good?
Because they're lazy so you don't want to eat things that eat meat, right? That's number one rule. If you've ever eaten any carnivores or any omnivores, it's not good. Don't eat a raccoon.
Oh.
Don't eat a bear. Don't eat anything that eats other living things. You just want to eat stuff that eats grass and corn. But a panda just eats bamboo. And they're so lazy, I would think it would be tender and delicious. So I'm not saying I'm going to go steal a panda and eat it. I'm just saying let's look into panda abundance and eating them.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That brings us to our style section, where we have a feature on hot rodent men. And NBC News reports that hot rodent men are apparently in season, according to a flurry of online articles and social media posts defining a new category of unconventionally attractive men. These men tend to have more angular facial structures, beady eyes, untidy hair, and are often lankier than the typical Hollywood heartthrob, although those descriptors don't always apply uniformly. Categorizing men into slightly obscure yet intuitive categories is a favorite internet pastime. One X post that sparked popular debate last year deemed men as falling into one of four categories.
Okay.
Eagle handsome, bear handsome, dog handsome, or reptilian handsome.
Okay.
But the rodent man is just the latest iteration of these ever-evolving terms and phrases popularized to describe the type of man the internet seems to collectively find attractive at the moment. Looking at these guys, they kind of do look like rodents.
They do look rodent. Do you agree with the classification of men into those categories?
I don't know what they mean.
I think eagle handsome would be Alec Baldwin, right?
But
a young Alec Baldwin. Okay, what are the other kinds?
Bear. That would be like a bearded dude.
Or maybe just me. Maybe a larger format fellow with a kindly face. Dog handsome. What's dog handsome? Glenn Youngkin looks like a golden retriever.
Okay, so it says for a while, golden retriever boyfriends, often described as goofy, kind, and fiercely loyal, were the trendy archetype to covet. And prior to that, a slew of specific Hollywood casting choices and celebrity couples had made sickly, skinny white men distinctly desirable.
So who's reptilian? Who's a reptilian? Who's a lizard-like man? I don't know. But do you
like Ethan Hawke?
Oh yes, he does have a sallowness to him.
Yes.
He does have a sallowness to him. Okay, I could definitely see that. So, who are these men? These are Josh O'Connor. I don't know who he is. He looks like a convict. Maybe that's her part. Jeremy Allen White.
He does.
Jeremy Allen White, who.
And then I think this Mike-faced guy, he's cute. He looks childlike.
Yeah, but he does look rat-like. I do see the Stuart Little energy there.
Yeah.
So you're open to a cute rodent approach.
Yes.
Which animal does Patrick look most like?
I was wondering that. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think he has some golden retriever elements to him. But maybe I'm underappreciating him as an eagle style. I don't know. I don't want to damn him with faint praise. Bear?
Yeah. I feel like he's got golden retriever.
I think he has the soul of a golden retriever, but I think he has the appearance. Now I could see dog.
Yeah.
But like Rolf from the Muppets.
What's it? Is it Nate Moore eagle?
Yeah, he's eagle. He's
okay.
eagle. He's
I agree.
the piercing eyes of Nate Moore, who's not with us this week, who's out hiking Mount Rainier, which is exactly what you'd expect an eagle to do. That's exactly what you'd expect an eagle to do.
That.
Would hike Mount Rainier to look from its craggy cliffs down at potential salmon to eat.
Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week. where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And Chris, mine is a story that is really TLDR. So it took me like all day on Saturday to read this story because I was getting up and down and dealing with my kid and whatever. But it is a great New York Times Magazine piece. The headline is Ibram X. Kendi faces a reckoning of his own. In 2020, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist galvanized Americans with his ideas. The past 4 years have tested them and him, and it is by an editor for the Times Magazine named Rachel Poser, and
What?
Rachel Poser, Poser, and the magazine notes she spoke to Kendi over a period of several months and visited him at his research center in Boston, and the center, of course, laid off dozens of people, and the fundraising has completely dried up after they got I think $10 million from Jack Dorsey and these huge corporate donations. And it is really good in that it's not just totally hostile to him. It really entertains him and his ideas, and yet she talks to people who lodged complaints against him or quit, who of course were sympathetic. They came to work for him, and portrays him as totally and completely paranoid. He's very, very secretive. And then his accusation, any complaint raised against him, he says, well, that's racist. That implies that they haven't done the work.
Yeah.
And so basically she, through interviewing him, reveals that you can't actually criticize him or bring to him a complaint. So she writes, he was far from the only nonprofit leader caught short as funding for racial justice work collapsed after 2020. And the center had gone from raising $40 million in 2020 to a fraction of that, $420,000 the next year. By the time the academic year began in the fall of 2021, Kendi decided to take extraordinary measures. Before the center began in-person work that September, Kendi sent the staff an email about, quote, security protocols, instructing them to conceal the location of the center even from other Boston University faculty members and students. It is critical not to share the address of the center with anyone or bring anyone into the center, Kendi wrote. The email included a mock script to be used in the event of an inquiry about the center's location, which ended abruptly with, I gotta go. So they talk about how paranoid and secretive he is, and that people in charge of funding for the center, he wouldn't share the books with them. The one question I will say that is not answered in this is, where the hell did the $40 million go?
Yeah.
And it left me wondering about that, but it's a very, very good piece.
People gave money to him. And what was her name? D'Angelo?
Robin D'Angelo.
It
talks about her too, and that they were paired together, but they have different ideas. She basically, yeah.
The money that went to Kendi and D'Angelo was the buying of indulgences. Have you read John McWhorter's book about, I think it's called Woke Racism? I forget what it's called, but it talks about the religious nature of anti-racism. And in keeping with a religious tone, the Reformation of Christianity had many causes and many consequences, but a core one was of the selling of indulgences, right? That the church was allowing people to pay to get time off their purgatory stays and be admitted to the kingdom of heaven. And what Kendi and D'Angelo were offering was, if you pay us, if you buy the book, if you have us come lecture, if you contribute to the center, you will atone for some of your whiteness. You will atone for some of your racism. And in a surprise move, 3 years later, it didn't work, right? It didn't. This is a good piece because it confronts the fact that racism will not be banished. We will never undo racism. It will never come to pass. We should try to ameliorate its consequences. We should think about those things ourselves. But the idea that here's what it is. Whenever they talk about we're having a moment, right? It suggests that, and then after this, human nature will be different. Human nature will not be different after this. And if you give Ibram X. Kendi $40 million and you stock his anti-racist baby book in your bookstore, you will not change human nature. In fact, human nature will assert itself when secretive, famous people lose $40 million of the money that was given to them.
Yeah. I highly recommend the piece.
Oh, me, Jerry West. Okay, so for West Virginians, Jerry West has extra. Is he the greatest West Virginian? I don't know. Chuck Yeager, probably the greatest West Virginian. In the pantheon, though, we've got Mary Lou Retton. We have Don Knotts. A lot of great West Virginians, but Jerry West, the icon, literally, the model for the NBA logo, and one of the greatest people to ever not only play the game, but to be involved. I only met Jerry West a couple of times. But Jerry West is worth talking about, and there's this interesting, useful piece in The Ringer about Jerry West, and a lot of it focuses on his relationship with the media. He was just as quick to take calls from reporters, also seeing his wisdom and insights, or sometimes just to seeking his wisdom and insights, or sometimes just to share the latest scuttlebutt. Officially, West told me back in 1997 he was not someone who would speak off the record. Unofficially, West was an irrepressible gossip and a delightful, candid truth teller. He'd tell you immediately if a purported star was overrated and was usually right. He'd admonish you for describing a player as great, insisting the word is too liberally used. He was right about that too. And yes, despite his protestations at his portrayal in the HBO show Winning Time, West had a fierce temper and an affinity for F-bombs. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something was a common biting refrain that would preface a feisty Jerry West lecture. You blanking people was another, usually preceding a broadside about the media. Jerry West, if you met him, was a taciturn hillbilly with his jaw set, and he seemed reclusive, seemed that he was not going to talk to anybody. But and this is just a good way to deal with the press, he picked and chose reporters. I knew one guy, a dear friend and mentor of mine, who was one of these people, Jody Jivden, R.I.P. But West took reporters into his confidence and helped shape the coverage around him by having this public persona of, I'm not talking to anybody, I'm not saying anything, but then cultivating these reporters and the relationship with them and giving them something special. And it may not seem, it is not transparent, it is true, but it is a good way to think about this for people who are in public life. You have to pick and choose, and it pays off to cultivate reporters in the long run.
I look forward to reading that piece, which I haven't read yet, but sounds great. Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And we have a note from David Ross, the editor of The Roadrunner. And he writes, Dear Chris and Eliana, I listen to your podcast every week that it's available, and I find it to be an oasis of sanity in an increasingly insane world. I've been editor at the same small town of about 20,000 for 40 years, and I'm steeped in community journalism, which I think is something that more national reporters could use. All I ever wanted to be was a small town newspaper editor. I never aspired to be a TV star. The real worth of small town journalism is that it makes reporters into generalists. They have to write about peacocks being rescued from trees, fire departments trying to get more funding, Chamber of Commerce feuds, and parades down the center part of town, all the while trying to keep business advertisers happy. It's an interesting life. When I listen to you folks, it helps me realize that what I do continues to have value. Please keep it up.
Yay!
And he sent an article, which is from the paper. The Roadrunner is the hometown newspaper of Valley Center, Palma County, Palomar Mountain, and North Escondido since 1974. And the headline is, making a long story short, David Ross celebrates 40 years at Roadrunner.
Hey!
And it's got a picture of him and everything. Valley Center and Escondido rely on honesty and truth from David Ross, editor of the Valley Roadrunner for 40 years and the Escondido Times advocate for 10 years. He has been there and written all about it. In fact, he's authored over 60,000 substantial articles.
I love this guy.
Yeah, it's great. So this is a great profile that we will link in our newsletter.
Thank you for sharing it.
And David, you got a great I love the jacket.
The fringe situation is 10 out of 10.
Great.
But and I wholly agree. And I'm a chauvinist for starting local because I started local, and I understand that that's true. But there's so much good that comes out of covering a community for all of these reasons that he lists, but also because of accountability, right? You're close to the people you're covering. You have to get it right. And you're going to see him again tomorrow. You're not just dive bombing some stranger from a million miles away. Great.
And then we have a letter from Danny Nichols in Sisters, Oregon.
Cool.
Hi, Eliana and Chris. Love the show, and you too. I'm sure you saw the reels and coverage of our little town of 3,000 residents, Sisters, Oregon, made national news when a rodeo bull jumped the arena fence at the Saturday night rodeo and rampaged through the concession area before being caught by the pickup men. The bull's name is Party Bus. So obviously he just needed a Bud Light and a corn dog. But my favorite part of the story was this. I couldn't resist sending you this headline from the Central Oregon Daily News. And the headline is, Woman violently thrown by escaped Sisters rodeo bull Saturday makes it to brunch Sunday. A woman who was tossed by a bull that jumped the fence and went into a concession area at the Sisters rodeo Saturday night was able to recover enough to attend a brunch the next day. Awesome.
That's
Awesome.
Fabulous. You ladies will not be deterred from brunching. This is our takeaway.
It was great.
Ladies will not be deterred.
And that brings us to, Chris, your favorite time of the week, where I am forced to say something nice, but please lead by example.
Howard Feynman died, and I knew Howard a little bit and liked him immensely. Howard was a ubiquitous presence on cable news for a long time. MSNBC. I think he made calls at all the ports of call along the way. I did panels with him. I swapped stories with him, and really liked Howard. Howard was very obviously, and he cut his teeth at Newsweek and wrote there. But he was a good political reporter. He was obviously a man of the left. There was no question where his ideological bias lay, but he was scrupulous about cultivating sources on both sides, and he was a pleasure. Howard was a pleasure. And here's some from his New York Times obituary. Indeed, Mr. Feynman remained proud of his professional roots in Kentucky, where he had learned to cover politics and policy, as well as to write quickly on deadline. He covered energy and the environment for 4 years at the Louisville Courier-Journal, including the infamous toxic landfill discovered at Love Canal near Niagara Falls in 1977. That was as good a place as any to get a grounding in what the next half century of American politics was going to be about, he said in an interview for this obituary last year. The rise of Reagan, the rise of the conservatives, and what we now think of as the anti-woke movement, if you will. All of that has its weight in the South. The Courier-Journal sent him to Washington in December 1977 after jumping to Newsweek in 1980 and getting a law degree in his off hours. He served as political correspondent, chief political correspondent, and senior editor and deputy Washington bureau chief. So rest in peace, Howard Feynman.
Chris, my favorite item, and everyone will have to forgive me, I just wanted to call attention to a Beacon piece that I spent the last 2 days working on with my colleague, Aaron Sibarium. And it was a fun piece because we had a source who captured Columbia University administrators texting each other during a panel that took place during Columbia's alumni reunions on Jewish life at Columbia, and they're texting each other vitriolic comments and vomit faces as these people are talking about the experience of Jewish students on the Columbia campus. And the person who was sitting behind one of these administrators took photographs of the text messages, and they're just clear as day. So it was a fun and also, I think, important story.
The Ivy Leagues, should fear the Beacon, fear the deeply sourced Washington Free Beacon in America's Ivy League institutions. Fear the Beacon.
Well, that is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about,
or a Panda recipe,
email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chacola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.